started a formal board meeting process that includes me, DC, Joel, and Roger. And those two have agreed to be like board member trustees. And Dan is going to take a look at our next board meeting and sit in and see if it's something he would like to support us with. I'm also working on the bylaws for the group. The whole idea is, remember, we need to transition to something more formal so we can take our personal bank accounts out of this. That's primarily the key reason. So we're going to be registering for a nonprofit status as a .org organization. I got 2 attorneys helping me, and Dan being one. So once the bylaws are done, we'll apply for the EIN number, and then we'll be off to the races. We'll keep you guys posted. So that's kind of one of the topics that usually shows up on our agenda. And then we're going to be talking about the convention. One thing I wanted to mention is, if you hadn't seen it, Mark Richardson put out an email about the bus that's being sponsored by the NMRA. And I was thinking, it would be convenient, or we could just decide among ourselves. What I was wanting to do is, I want to do a Zoom with just the folks that are going to Chattanooga, so we can like talk about a couple of things if there's something that we want to do together, like a road trip or what have you. So I'll put out an email if you have any suggestions or whatnot. But there will be a Zoom coming right after the June board meeting, so we got some time to get our ducks lined up. And I am one step away from completing this AP process with the NMRA. I got a 3-way stub that shorted out, and that was the last thing I needed to get done. I was like, geez. So I've called for the cavalry to come help me figure out what is in the way of this thing. And we had an open house on Saturday. We had a double division meet, Garden State and New Jersey division. And we had an open house. I had 27 guests here, which was wonderful and a great time. A couple of new members might be on the wings. So I'm following up with them. And I think that's it. Anybody else? Any announcements before we start?
Oh, Tom, I've built 2 3-way.
You.
I can get with you later.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. Yep.
All right, are we
Over to you.
we ready?
Go ahead. Yep.
All right, tonight we're introducing Roy McCord. He is a historical interpreter at Fort Collier in Winchester, Virginia. That is, it was Battery 10?
Under federal occupation, it was Battery 10.
Battery 10, right outside of Winchester, Virginia. Of 3 to 4 forts that surrounded Winchester. It was the closest one that was next to the Winchester and Potomac grade. So it's been passed down generationally through one family, and it still holds up as a historical center. And he is a great member of their historical crew. He's a reenactor and has a great passion for its history and the railroad history of the Shenandoah Valley. So I'll give it over to him.
Thank you, Austin. Definitely, as Austin just said, big time history. Not only am I a member, but this April, 2 months ago, I just became a board member. So I'm actually on the board at Fort Collier, so I get a voice in there, what they do. So
wow.
I'm hoping to put on more events there and having to do more stuff and to let the public come in. But as a little more about me. I've only been a reenactor since 2023, and since then I've been in love. Being able to come out in uniform. Of course, I'm not in uniform currently because it's just too hot for that, even in my own house with AC. But luckily, I get to, have the ability to educate, talk to people. Currently, I'm a college student going for my history degree. And I, of course, have an education minor. So hopefully today I'll be putting that, that minor to use.
So you might, if you're going to get into this, just tell me to shut up. But I'd be curious to know what got you so hooked into the Civil War. And at some point, was the railroads a significant aspect of that, or that just came along with the ride?
It came along with the ride. With coming into the Civil War, my grandfather, who has since passed away in 2019, he told me, sitting in his lap, and when I'm, yay tall, he said that we had a family history and a legend, and that we were called the Kilpatricks, and I wanted to look into that, and it wasn't until my either freshman or sophomore year of college where I actually found the story on my ancestor and my lineage. And growing up and being a kid, I watched the tank engine, so trains went hand in hand. And so
Wow.
with the Civil War legend of the family, I've tracked it down, and it's great.
I gotta ask, what is this legend? Were you Northerners, Southerners? What's the deal?
Southerners. We're one of the contenders for the single largest family to contribute soldiers to the Confederacy.
Really?
Six family members: the father and five sons. Sorry, the father and the father and five sons.
What units? Do you know the units they were with?
Company A, 45th Virginia.
Oh boy, this is a whole sideline conversation I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on, but that's very cool.
I'll rope everything in. Don't worry.
Great. Thank you, pal.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and get us started. So the Shenandoah Valley, Western Virginia. I don't care what John Denver's song says and what West Virginia thinks. Western Virginia is where we're focusing on this today. So for that, I want with the Shenandoah Valley, of course, the Greater Valley region, the Greater Appalachian Valley, has during the course of the Civil War had 5 railroads in it. Of course, obviously for this presentation, we'll be morely focusing on 3 of them, that being the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the Winchester and Potomac, and the Manassas Gap. And of course, to just tack on there, we have the Virginia Central and the Virginia and Tennessee Railways. Now, I want to mention, to contrast to what I'll be talking about, with the Virginia Tennessee and the Virginia Central, those 2 railroads had campaigns waged against them directly, as those were the end goals. Franz Sigel in May of 1864 is told, go to the Virginia Central, tear it up. Also in 1864, Arvell and Crook, 2 Union commanders, are tasked to go and destroy the lead mines in Wytheville, the salt works in Saltville, aptly named, both of them, and of course the railroad depots for the Virginia and Tennessee Railway. Those are whole campaigns waged against them. But for what we'll talk about, I'll be talking about how the war surrounds these facilities and these pathways, not just directly. Hey, your end goal is that railroad, but as the war is surrounding these. Now, with that, we're going to focus on the lower Shenandoah Valley, even though it's the northern side. I know, confusing. But within the lower Shenandoah Valley, we go from the Potomac River roughly down to Harrisonburg and in some cases Stanton or however you want to say it. That being said, within the lower Shenandoah Valley, that extends into Maryland with with battles like Antietam, the siege of Harper's Ferry, as we all can probably talk about. But those are only the major instances. A National Park Service study had just recently come out and said that there were 325 battles within the Shenandoah Valley alone. So when I say that behind this presentation, this is the most contested area, I think I'm in the right spot. And to live here is amazing. And as I have on my slide, Winchester alone changes hands 72 times during the Civil War. Some diary entries by Winchester civilians dictate up to 90 times, but the official count is 72. And with Winchester comes the Winchester and Potomac Railroad, and just south, the Manassas Gap Railroad. Now, for this map, as I show the up on the very top, the B&O Railroad, of course, the Winchester and Potomac Railroad, which after the war is acquired by the B&O, that's why they're in the same color. The Winchester and Strasburg Railroad, which is entirely post-war but is relevant for this story. And in white there, of course, the Manassas Gap Railroad, which I'm talked about in the server plenty of times over.
I don't think you have the map showing.
Yeah, the map is right there on the right-hand side.
I see it.
Okay, perfect. I wanted to make sure my slides were still working. Anyway, but for our story, I want to take us to Harper's Ferry. 1859, before the Civil War even starts, we're already talking about these railroads, and they're already seeing bloodshed. Of course, it's October, it's cold, and it's the night of John Brown's raid. I think October 18th is the correct day for John Brown's raid. But of course, anybody can correct me on that. But John Brown raids the federal arsenal that's in Harper's Ferry. He wishes to do a slave revolt and have thousands of slaves join him to fight for their freedom. Ironically, in doing so, this raid turns bad and it turns deadly really quickly. And ironically, extremely ironically, the very first casualty is a freed black man named Hayward Shepherd, who is pictured in that sketch there, sitting on the cart. It is the only sketch of the man that exists.
Wow.
He is. There is an eastbound B&O express train that is halted by John Brown's men, and at the B&O railway station where Hayward Shepherd worked, he's roughly 40 years old. He notices that the train is stopped on the bridge, leaves his station because he's a baggage handler. So his job is to send baggage from the B&O Railroad to the Winchester and Potomac and vice versa. He leaves the station, takes a look, sees two armed men, and turns to run back, and he is shot in the back. And the bullet goes through the back of his chest and out of his left nipple, or just below his left nipple. And he is dragged back to the station where his wound is pronounced fatal, and he becomes the very first person, a free black man in a what is supposed to be a slave uprising, is killed. And it happens right on the very famous, as we can see in the photographs, the wooden covered bridge of the B&O Railroad.
Right. Wow.
It's an insane story, and it happens very quickly. And like I said, it's extremely ironic that this happens.
Yep.
Of course, John Brown's raid turns south. The U.S. Marines are called in, and we get to see every single character at John Brown's hanging: Robert E. Lee, Jeb Stuart, Stonewall Jackson, Henry Weiss, who is the governor of Virginia at the time. Every single figure that we know of from the southern side is present at John Brown's hanging and watches it happen.
Even John Wilkes Booth, unfortunately so.
Exactly. Everybody's there. It's insane looking at the antebellum period. And all of this is happening, and the war hasn't even kicked off yet. But war is coming. War is on the horizon. As secession, and there's going to be a million John Browns is the quote that's talked about day in and day out. The South begins to declare its secession, and if you read the secession documents, the war is about slavery. That's a hot button topic, but the secession documents say it all. Now, that being said, the militias are formed, and the secession is declared. And of course, with that, the moment that Virginia secedes, we get we get Stonewall Jackson's Great Locomotive Raid. Stonewall Jackson on May 23rd, the literal moment secession is declared, halts all east and westbound traffic on the B&O Railroad in Jefferson and Berkeley County. And he captures 42 locomotives and 305 cars, mainly gondola coal cars, some of which are too heavy to be hauled down the Winchester and Potomac Railroad and are set alight. Those railroad cars burn for about 2 weeks. As one of the quotes was, the hot embers could be seen even through the night, as someone would have thought that a barn had been lit on fire at that very moment. And of course, right off rip as well, just after secession, as Confederate troops are moving, they're not Confederates yet, they're still the militia. They're moving back and forth through Jefferson and Berkeley County, and on June 14th, for the very first time, the Harper's Ferry Bridge is blown up. It's set on fire and it's destroyed. That would be the first of 9 times that bridge is destroyed throughout the entire course of the war, both from either flooding or military action. I believe 4 times is the count by military action by the Shenandoah Valley Battlefield Foundation. Now, that's all in 1861, and just on the B&O. At the same time, we have the Winchester and Potomac Railway, which I had gotten the opportunity to go to the archives here in Winchester at the Hanley Library, and I got to look at the Halltown, which is just outside of Harper's Ferry, the Halltown Station Master's book, where I got to read all of the cargo accounts and rolling stock that was coming through Halltown to go to Harper's Ferry and that's why I have here as the bullet point, it's a subsidiary slash puppet of the B&O Railroad, because in that account in the ledger, almost every single thing, the recipient was the B&O, 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 and the B&O. Almost everything was to Confederate fears at the time was this is a north to south railroad and everything is going north into Baltimore. It's not coming to Virginia. It's not coming to our locality. That's one reason why the Manassas Gap was created in the first place, but I'll get there when I get there on the slides. And so at this time, the B&O basically owns the Winchester and Potomac Railroad only in cargo and freight and the actual traffic that's moving through. Now, February 9th of 1862, this is after the Romney campaign that Jackson does, after secession, after Manassas, and after the Confederate military is finally established as the Confederacy. They're no longer Virginia militia, they are Confederates. William L. Clark, who is the president of the Winchester and Potomac Railroad, on February 9th of 1862, he writes a letter to the Confederate government, and it basically equivalents to, please don't destroy my railway, please. And that's literally what the entire paper is. It's about 4 or 5 paragraphs long, and it basically equivalents to, do not abandon it, do not tear us up. We have, I believe the count is 100, yeah, right here, 100,000 bushels of flour ready to be shipped. 1 bushel is approximately 60 pounds. So someone here can do the math quicker than I can. And basically in this letter, he accounts we know what we're capable of, even though we're of older flat bar rail construction. We know what we can do. We know what we can haul. Use our railroad to get all of the equipment that you're taking from Martinsburg. Send it down our line, because you're already taking hundreds of tons of stuff down the Valley Pike. Just use our railroad, and we can do the exact same thing in a quicker amount of time. Now, to somewhat he has agreed to. The railroad is currently still in service. It's still being used, and it's still around. He outright says at one point that up to Charlestown is we can absolutely use it. It's in our hands, which is perfect for the cost of one of the things where he said there's 75,000 bushels of grain in Jefferson County alone. And from there, he wants to move that south, take it by wagon from Winchester to Stroudsburg, and then export it out through the Manassas Gap Railroad. Again, it's going to get very confusing about this whole thing in a minute. If you're already confused with the amount of information, don't worry, it's going to get worse. Now, my part, the Winchester and Potomac Railroad goes right into Winchester. Today it continues on and it ends in Stroudsburg, but by the time of the Civil War, it ends right there on Piccadilly Street, where, if you guys know it, is the modern B&O railway station, which was built in 1880, roughly. That's where the line originally ended, with the depots and the shops being around Baker Street today. Now, I don't have my period map on me. That's over in my bookshelf. But we have a lot of stuff to cover, and just looking at a map of, Winchester, of the town proper, isn't really worth it, as I have the battle map there, but it's really hard to see. Either way, Fort Collier, this is where my part really shines. Being a board member at Fort Collier, I've invested myself heavily into the Third Battle of Winchester, September 19th, 1864. And again, I'm jumping around a lot in the timeline because everything happens every single minute. It's insane how condensed and how contentious this area is. Again, reinforcing the idea that that no single campaign is waged against these railroads, but rather the war is just outright moving through them. Now, Fort Collier is built and operational in August of 1861. Like I said, Virginia secedes in May, and come August, this fort, which is the very first ever fortification in Winchester, is built and put into Confederate service. The 13th Massachusetts is actually charged come March of 1862, March 12th, 1862. They're tasked with taking this fort, and the letters that I have from them dictate that they thought they were outright going to die by charging this installation because of how formidable it was. Of course, the sketch on that I have up top there does not do it justice in the slightest. But this fort is not only built as the first installation, the first northern installation in Winchester, or first installation on the north end of Winchester, excuse me, but is more likely a premise of to monitor the traffic routes, as we can see on the map there that I have on both of them. The Fort Collier is built not only next to Route 11 Martinsburg Pike, but is also next to the Winchester and Potomac Railroad. Both avenues which are major important vital arteries for the Confederacy at this time, especially early war, where again all that traffic that William L. Clark had talked about is coming through and being pushed more south. Now that at the same time as the war continues and Harper's Ferry becomes a hard point for the Union to hold, there are still the exact same Confederate fears that Union forces can use the exact same avenues as they come to do several times over in the actual battle when marching through. Every time that the Union comes into Winchester, they come from the Valley Pike. It's only one time in January 1st of 1863 that they don't come down the Valley Pike.
Who
Now,
was the who was the namesake for Fort Collier?
Fort Collier is named after Lieutenant Collier, who resigned his commission in the Navy. William H. Whiting is not superintendent. That's not the right title, but he's the man put in charge by Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston, and together Whiting chooses Collier to build the fort. Now it's built around Isaac Stein's property, and Isaac Stein, he's a leave loaner, and I could talk on and on about Fort Collier and the Stein family and its story. That's a presentation for another day. But this is the small blip. And so Fort Collier is named after Lieutenant Collier, who is the chief engineer and architect behind the fortifications. A little teaser, if you ever come up this way, in Fort Collier they have a display case with a naval button that had popped off of Lieutenant Collier's jacket, and they have on display there. And it was found when they did an archaeological survey in the early 2000s, roughly. But that's where Fort Collier gets its namesake. And that's a great question. Thank you. Now, the Manassas Gap Railway. It's within the Shenandoah Valley. It's only 37 miles long. It extends roughly just beyond 50 miles when you actually reach Manassas Junction. The railway cut that Stonewall Jackson uses during the Second Battle of Manassas or Second Battle of Bull Run, whichever name you fancy, that railroad cut is actually made by the Manassas Gap Railway Company to avoid paying tolls on the Orange and Alexandria Railway, as we can see there on that map. But of course, that's not finished by the time the war kicks around, so that red line indicates the entire stretch of the Manassas Gap, and it only goes to Mount Jackson. Now, from here, as I've mentioned earlier, the Winchester and Potomac Railway, that was built first. That's built roughly in the 1830s, the late 1830s. And it's a more north to south route going out of northern ports like Baltimore, where in Harper's Ferry it connects with the B&O, and all of the grain and all of the food stuffs go right out into a northern port. And so the Manassas Gap Railway is constructed to negate that. It is southern, it is Virginia owned and operated, and it will suffice in Virginia ports. That is the main goal of the Manassas Gap Railroad and was key to its construction. And of course, with the Shenandoah Valley as a whole being the breadbasket of the South, the Manassas Gap serves that beautifully. From Strasburg to Mount Jackson, even today, it's nothing but farms. If you take Route 11 or Interstate I-81 today, it's nothing but farms, and it still holds true. And the land itself is extremely fertile. And just metal detecting, I can find a Civil War bullet almost in every single backyard. It's amazing. But either way, the Manassas Gap Railway is meant for food. A along with that, I'll come back to the Manassas Gap Railway over the course of the war, as this will be a monster of a line for battles either held on it or around it. Now, that brings me to the most complex plan ever. As I had mentioned previously with the Winchester and Strasburg Railway, that's entirely a post-war creation. But its concept to be made and laid comes in that February 9th letter from William L. Clark. He writes again to the Confederate Congress, and Confederate Congress agrees. If we're having issues, having to stop in Winchester, get a wagon team, and then bring it down to Strasburg, why not just make a railway altogether? And so Confederate Congress puts together and passes a resolution to create a conjoined railway. At the same time, George B. McClellan of the Union also wants to do the exact same thing. Is anybody else confused? Because I don't think there's ever a time in any Civil War battle or area or theater where both sides want to do the exact same thing at the exact same time. Now with McClellan, he is so obsessed with the Winchester and Potomac Railway, it actually gets him fired. And I'll talk more about it on my After Antietam slide, which is directly next. But McClellan is so fixated on the Manassas Gap Railway and the Winchester and Potomac Railway to connect them so that he can have an encirclement of railroads. That's McClellan's plan, so that he can use the Orange and Alexandria from Manassas Junction to Stroudsburg, to then where he can come through Winchester to Harper's Ferry and then back around so that he can have the total control of Northern Virginia. Confederate Congress recognizes the exact same thing, and so everyone wants to do it. That's why when I talk about campaigns and all of these different things happening, this is probably the most campaigny that these railways get, where it's, hey, this is the strategic objective to combine these railways together. Now, Antietam, right? Bloodiest day in American history, September 19th, 1862. After Antietam, Robert E. Lee is defeated and he is brought back into Virginia. Of course, most all of us know. Either way, after Antietam, Lee is held up in Winchester, and from Winchester he dispatches out basically pickets of whole divisions to watch the border, to watch the Potomac River, to make sure that McClellan does not follow him. And in that, in preparation to move, come October 19th, Lee, as he's getting ready to evacuate to move further south, Lee orders Jackson and McLaws, McLaws being a part of Jackson's command already, to destroy the railway facilities in both Jefferson, Frederick, and Berkeley County.
Wow.
One being which is the Martinsburg Roundhouse, as we can see here in my photos. Now, in my colored photo on the left, that is from 1990, where middle school kids had set fire to what had remained of the Martinsburg Roundhouse. The photo on my right there is what remains of the original roundhouse per the Civil War. Now, the part that is on fire there is reconstructed and is now the museum that it is today. But for dramatization, I figured that it fits the bill really well. To have the visual description of Jackson burning down the depots, the shops, the hotels, the crew facilities, everything. I think it perfectly encapsulated, even though there's cars and a fire truck in it.
Right.
Now, for 37 miles east and west on the Baltimore and Ohio Railway is nothing but campfires. Jackson's men had perfectly aligned themselves and began to rip up and tear down B&O infrastructure all in Berkeley County. For 37 miles is nothing but campfires, where they're making the equivalent to Sherman's neckties, of course, bending them around trees and making basically these railroads entirely unusable. McLaw's division is set out, and again, this is where the most complex plan ever comes into play. As McLaw's division sets out, Union observers and surveyors are coming down to look at the Winchester and Potomac. They see the Confederate division and they scurry off. McLaws' division does not return until the entirety of the Winchester and Potomac Railway is destroyed. All 32 miles of the Winchester and Potomac is torn up, destroyed, and left entirely in disuse and disrepair. Throughout the rest of the war, and especially in 1864, when we come back to the Shenandoah Valley, the Union railway workers and the United States Military Railroad are trying to put this line back into service. But we'll get there when we get there. But for now, 32 miles is fully gone.
Wow. Great photos.
Oh, thank you. Now that being said, second Winchester, this is when we come back to the Shenandoah Valley for a brief second. It's after Chancellorsville. Lee is on a high rise again. It's a very weird trend that Lee does. He wins a bunch of battles. He gets a big ego. He goes north. He loses. Weird, right? Anyway, but it's after Chancellorsville. Lee is riding high, and he decides, I'm going to go to Pennsylvania. And so the door opens up. After Chancellorsville, the ball gets rolling. Lee decides to use the Blue Ridge Mountains as a screen, and he decides to move through the Shenandoah Valley up to Pennsylvania, to where he can then wreak havoc and gain a lot of foodstuffs. Now, that being said, we have the Second Battle of Winchester, June 13th through the 15th of 1863. It's a battle that's huge in scale, and it encapsulates the entire town of Winchester, and it's barely talked about. If this battle had not happened, Lee would have been tremendously already undersupplied, as the Confederate Army already is at the time. But I want to talk about this battle more specifically, as is this battle map right here. Now, the map itself is outdated, but the only reason why it's outdated is because the target property listed there in yellow has actually been acquired by the SVBF and is preserved.
Excellent.
This whole map is preserved. It's roughly about 120 acres of land that is now preserved and is becoming a battlefield park. So there's my battlefield preservation spotlight. Yes.
Well done.
Either way, this battle, as we can see on the timestamp there, is at 5 o'clock in the morning. Roughly where the 87th Pennsylvania is, they on the old Charlestown Road, is where they encounter Confederate pickets, to where the entire division under Johnston here, different Johnston, not Joseph E. Johnston, different Johnston. Johnston's entire division is woken up by the gunfire of pickets and immediately engages the Union retreating column of troops and captures almost all of them.
Wow.
It is a massive military victory for Ewell, a Confederate general who has been in the Shenandoah Valley plenty of times and has been through this way with Jackson twice. Twice is an understatement, because they, the 1862 Valley campaign, they're going up and down the valley. This is not a confusing map. I have more confusing maps later.
Which are the two rail lines are on there, Roy?
So the rail line on the left, that is from 1912, where the surrender site is. That comes in 1912. That is the Pennsylvania Railway, which is now the Winchester and Western Railway today. So the one that we really need to focus on is smack dab in the middle of the battlefield, which is the remnants and most importantly, the railroad embankment of the Winchester and Potomac Railway. Johnson had cleverly camped his entire division on the right-hand side of the rail embankment, where the Union Army is marching through. That's the Valley Pike. That is the main road network, and is really the only paved road at this time. Paved being gravel and suitable to travel down for plenty of people. It's a wider road, and it's also a toll road. Thank God I don't have to pay tolls on this road. Oh, thank God I'm a commuter student, and that travels becomes so much easier. But Johnson's entire division's camped behind the railroad embankment. When the pickets start shooting, the entire division basically uses it as almost as a trench or a parapet. There it is. And they begin to skirmish and fire across from their position. And the Union Army under Robert Milroy, who's an idiot, entirely gets captured. It's one of the I want to say the second largest surrender, single largest surrender of federal troops of the Civil War.
Oh,
Of course, Harper's Ferry being number one. Um, but for Robert Milroy, he escapes. He's court-martialed. He's declared an idiot by Lincoln, and almost is never given a field command again. He gets it one more time, but basically for the rest of the war, he's a clerk. He screws up so bad that he's an entire military disgrace. And the people of Winchester celebrate because of how horrible he was. And that they're finally glad that their boys in gray are back. Now, the general's reports. Now, I want to backtrack again to McClellan getting fired. I have here a letter from Abraham Lincoln to George B. McClellan, October 13th. This is 6 days before the Winchester and Potomac is destroyed. October 13th of 1862. And the letter basically boils down to, what are you doing? You don't need the railway. Keep moving forward. And in the words of Lincoln, but the enemy does now subsist his army at Winchester at a distance nearly twice as great from railroad transport as you would have to do without the railroad last named, being the Winchester and Potomac Railroad. He now wagons from Culpeper Courthouse, which is just about twice as far as you would have to do from Harper's Ferry. He is certainly no more than half as well provisioned with wagons as you are. I certainly should be pleased for you to have the advantage of the railroad from Harper's Ferry to Winchester, but it wastes all of the remainder of autumn to give it to you, and in fact ignores the question of time, which cannot and must not be ignored. So McClellan, like I had mentioned, his great encirclement of railroads, as he wants to do to control Northern Virginia and have security in Maryland. Lincoln does not like this plan. Lincoln is fed up. This is in October, which is almost an entire month after Antietam, and McClellan hasn't moved. He's been wanting to conduct surveys. He's been licking his wounds, and Lincoln is fed up that he's not moving in any slightest. And again, at this point, when this letter is written, McClellan is still at the Antietam battlefield, and he's still sitting there over in Maryland. And so finally, Lincoln comes out, directly visits McClellan, probably says some obscenities as that conversation's lost to time, and McClellan finally gets moving. On November 3rd, near Ruckersville, which is in the Loudoun Valley of Virginia, which again, McClellan's on the move. He's brought the entirety of the Army of Potomac into Virginia, as Lee is still in Winchester. And so Lee is getting his butt in gear, and he's moving south to try and beat McClellan further south. As in that letter, though I did not read, Lincoln wants McClellan to move south, and he wants him to cut off Lee's supply lines as well as communication lines to Richmond. And finally, McClellan's doing it. He's doing great. And on November 3rd of 1862, McClellan surveys the Manassas Gap Railway to see what it's like. At this time, the Manassas Gap Railway has already been changed hands roughly already about 20 times during the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 62 from that summer. During the Battle of Front Royal, more specifically, a Union supply train had actively been captured mid-battle by Confederate forces. It's the only time in the Civil War where during a large-scale battle, the supply train that has the provisions, ammunition, and more importantly, the payroll of Union forces in the Shenandoah Valley is captured by the entirety of the Confederate Army under Jackson. And again, it's to have such contention in an area is practically unheard of, and that's why we're here today to reinforce that opinion. Now, November 3rd of 1862. After all of this, it's fall. The armies are settling down for winter quarters, and so finally McClellan has the time, as he's now moved south. He is right basically there, touching the Manassas Gap Railway, and he finally sends a survey team to go and look at it. And their report is the exact same report that will eventually be handed down the next year on November 3rd of 1863 by George Gordon Meade. And it's the exact same report, an entire year apart. And so this will allow us to jump way ahead in time again. Um, both November reports indicate the Manassas Gap Railway is not destroyed. It is practically in serviceable condition, but it is rather only because of its disuse and overgrowth by the shifting of the lines that has allowed this railroad to fall into disrepair. And it's incredible. It's not the exact same of what we had seen in Berkeley and Jefferson County with the Baltimore and Ohio and the Winchester and Potomac, where they're outright destroyed. But it's the Manassas Gap Railway, which just outright isn't used because the line is just shifting so far back and forth. And from there, the valley gets somewhat cold, and we don't see a lot. But fine. And again, where I said maps are going to get confusing, this is what I mean. This map is going to get very confusing very quickly. It's on the Virginia and Tennessee Railway where we finally return to the Shenandoah Valley. At the Battle of Lynchburg, June 17th through the 18th of 1864, Jubal Anderson, I think that's his right. Yeah, Jubal Early. Jubal Anderson Early is sent out west to the Shenandoah Valley by Robert E. Lee, who's at this point in the trenches in Petersburg and Richmond, and his job is go west, create a diversion, and wreak some havoc. That's basically the entirety of his orders, boiled down. That being said, at the Battle of Lynchburg, as more forces and Confederate troops are massing into the city, every single time they play, or not that they play, but that they arrive, Jubal Early, even in the middle of the night, directly orders, let a big brass band play and let the civilians cheer. And that's exactly what they do. The drums sound, the train blows its whistle, and it's a great time all around as the Confederates come into the city. David R. Hunter, who can hear this from his encampment, goes, crap, and decides to leave. David R. Hunter leaves, and instead of going back up the valley where he had just come down and is one of the most successful Union commanders to come directly down the valley, he decides to be an idiot, just like Milroy, and instead of going back up the valley where he can secure foodstuffs, decides to go west towards Charleston, what is now the capital of West Virginia. And his route takes him through the deep mountains of West Virginia into Ohio, and then he takes the railroad back out east. Lincoln and the entirety of the War Department are rightfully pissed that he did this, because he took his entire army out of the war for no reason for 2 months, which gave Jubal Early the greatest opportunity of a lifetime. The entire open front of the entire Shenandoah Valley to go north. The only time from all the way down in Lynchburg, as we can see on the map, Jubal Early has an open door, and the only time where he encounters Union pickets is on the other side at Maryland Heights of Harper's Ferry. Jubal Early has an open door, and he wins so closely that he gets not in sight, but inside of the Washington, D.C. border at Fort Stevens, before having to retreat back. Jubal Early,
Right.
with this opportunity, with the railroads, with the deception of railroad whistles and trains, manages to do what Lee couldn't and fight inside of D.C. And at one point during the battle, Lincoln is tackled by an aide, and that aide is shot while tackling Lincoln because Lincoln decided to look over a parapet and view the battle. And again, it is a massive precedent for how close Lincoln had almost died during the war in an active battle.
So in the map, it shows Early leaving from Cold Harbor. Did he use trains much for transport, or was that all on foot?
Yep. No. It was right there. He had taken the. I can't remember which railroad that is, but it was there where he had taken the railroad to Gordonsville, and then from there south to Lynchburg. As David R. Hunter was coming, as you can see there, trying to come through Lynchburg, next courthouse, and try and cut off the Richmond and Danville Railroad, and trying to take that railway out of service to cut Lee's supply lines. And so instead of going to Waynesboro like how he originally wanted, he goes to Lynchburg instead to stop Union forces.
I think that might have been the Virginia Central Railroad.
Yeah, I was
No,
gonna
the
say.
Virginia, because the Virginia Central Railroad goes from Stanton to Gordonsville to Richmond. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
Now, after Fort Stevens, Jubal Early is repulsed, and he now fully remains in the northern Shenandoah Valley. After the Battle of Second Kernstown, July 24th of 1864, Jubal Early and the entirety of the Confederate Second Corps remain in the northern Shenandoah Valley. And as we can see on the map there, Winchester geographically is above Washington. So that already sets off the alarm bells of the entire War Department in D.C. Now, at the same time, Union General Philip Sheridan is sent out west. I don't want to say out west, but he's sent into Western Virginia and is in command of Union forces. And his goal is to drive Early out of the valley and to finally secure it. Now, with that being said, Sheridan says, "All right, Chief, I got this." And almost immediately, he turns into every Union commander stereotype that we know of. He's slow. He doesn't move. He wants to concentrate his army, and overall is what sounds to be pretty lazy. And so, during August of 1864, at the battles of Summit Point, Smithfield Crossroad, more specifically at the Battle of Summit Point, the Winchester and Potomac Railroad again is directly involved in the battle, where Confederate infantry moved down the at that point abandoned railroad embankment, as the Winchester and Potomac Railroad is being rebuilt from Harper's Ferry, and at that point was serviceable up to Charlestown.
This is the Winchester and Potomac right here, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep, one of my
And
favorite photographs.
which in that picture as well, that picture is taken in the winter of 1864, which will be after all of these great battles. But with this picture, this is in northern hands. This is at this point a U.S. military railroad, as they've now taken the direct control and operation of this railway line. So it's directly under their management and reconstruction that this railway is to be put back into service.
One of the things I like about sorry for a second, just want to, you can see the train on the left of the locomotive is going right. The second boxcar behind it looks like it has a light colored door. And those are the kinds of things that get me going. Is like, I wonder what that could have looked like. And of course, it gives all kinds of plausibility for scratch building or configuring things so you got some unique variables within the railroad. Thanks, Roy.
Yeah, absolutely. More importantly, to what I want to point out in this photo is the direct fears that Confederate commanders and planners had all the way back in 1862 when they ordered this railway destroyed. Now that this railway is open, look at the line not on the left as you had pointed out, but on the opposite line on the right. All of those all those flat cars are all packed with dudes.
Yes.
I can't even count. I lose count every single time I try to count. But there's more than one photo.
That's
Which is
danger zone, man.
exactly. There's a crap ton of men in this photo. And they're being pushed further and further south through this railway line. As I had said, the line is serviceable up to Charlestown, where at this point, August of 64, General Grant takes the time to leave the entrenchments of Petersburg, come all the way up to this way to talk sense into Sheridan and tell him to move, and then takes the railway back to D.C., hops on a boat, and then goes back to Petersburg to go back to besieging Lee. And so Grant made the visit to Charlestown. He kicks some sense into Sheridan, and Sheridan decides to get on the move. Now, as I had mentioned previously, Sheridan is in command of the Union Army through to September, and this is where it gets bad. After the Third Battle of Winchester, which I briefly showed on my Fort Collier slide, the Confederates under Jubal Early are kicked back. They fall back to Fisher's Hill. There's another battle that happens 3 days later, so September 9th. So September 22nd is when Fisher's Hill happens. They're beaten again, and the Confederate forces are now on the run. And with that, Sheridan takes the opportunity from Staunton all the way up to basically Winchester. They enact the burning. And the burning is the most cost. Oh, my PC is running low. The burning is the most costly event of the entire Civil War. If you thought General Sherman in Atlanta was bad, this is worse. 71 million pounds of food, 43,000 animals, and in Staunton, in a railroad depot, they found 500 miles of spare track, which they just decided to tear up and destroy anyway. Um, at one point, a Union soldier had written in his account. He had said, before me on top of a rise, I could see 142 barns and homes simultaneously on fire. General Sheridan's orders were specifically not to allow man nor beast to have food, and these orders were to be enacted incredibly swiftly and quickly. At one point, a family that was fleeing south was stopped by Union soldiers. Their wagon was ransacked, and they even threw out the powder and the flour that they had had to make pancakes because no one was allowed to have food. And then they were allowed to continue moving south. Now, back to the Manassas Gap, because this is where this will inflict it. From Harrisonburg all the way to Strasburg is where this burning happens, on the left-hand side of Massanutten Mountain. From there, highlighted in yellow, which is the Manassas Gap Railroad. Remember, it technically ends in Mount Jackson, so this map shows modern-day railroads as well. There are 6 battles that are directly fought on or around the Manassas Gap Railroad. 2 battles at Front Royal, Fisher's Hill, Tomsbrook, Newmarket, which is kind of close, and then, of course, Cedar Creek. All of these battles are happening in quick succession right after one another. And so, that precedes the amount of contention, the amount of battles that are happening. And again, it's not directly one singular campaign that marks these as the objective, but rather the war itself. And that's where I can end it. A very swift ending.
Your recall of dates and times and people, and I was like, geez, you've done this a couple of times, right? I mean, it sounds like you didn't arrive there like a couple of weeks ago.
No, I just finished the slides at 4:00 today.
Wow. Nice, man.
He does do this for a living.
Oh yeah, let me.
He does do it for a living.
So I'll be a little unprofessional and move around so that I can stay on the call with you guys as my computer gets ready to die.
Got it. Was there, when I think again in terms of railroads, and clearly, Jackson and company destroyed as much as they could, especially around Winchester and what have you. Did you notice any particular pattern or any stories about the railroads that could indicate how they were operated or what they transported? Anything regarding the difficulty in acquiring railroads? Like, was the South pretty much with the Virginia Central had as much as they needed to do what they needed to do, etc.?
So, from at least my experience, because as you had said, it sounds like I've done this before. I had I'm going to call it a dietary experience of research, because I did a similar topic for a college paper this past spring semester at Shepherd. And so, with my research, I had always found it that, especially within the Shenandoah Valley, there was always a surplus of material. When you have the the story of Confederate forces having barely any food, barely any material, and stuff like that, you believe it and you go for it. But as I had said, in 1864, when the Confederacy is meant to be at its low point, Jubal Early is inside of D.C., took a shot at Lincoln, came back, and then once the Union Army comes through and inflicts a massive amount of monetary value, food value, in warehouses in Staunton or Stanton, they find 500 spare surplus miles of railroad.
Wow.
I briefly glazed over it. So if you can have the ability to, because it takes a lot to produce railroad tracks and railroad infrastructure. But if you have just 500 miles worth of track sitting in a warehouse, you obviously have the ability to not really use it, as we've talked about, where it's disuse and the lines are moving, but
Right.
you have the ability to have stuff. So in other instances where the Confederacy is galvanizing railway tracks to make ironclads and just inverting railroad railroad
Rail
the
iron.
track. Yep, the rail iron. Thank you. And just inverting it to make basic armor for ironclad ships. You can instead have this opportunity to just instead leave it for when you can use it later, which is what happened in the Shenandoah Valley.
Yeah, this is a real river counter kind of question, but with the rails, that's an extraordinary amount of rails there. Chances are it probably would have come from the Norfolk. No, I'm trying to think what mill
The
was doing rail.
Tredegar Ironworks.
Were they doing rail though?
Tredegar
Tredegar,
was.
Yeah.
Tredegar could roll, but it was not rolling
Chances
rail.
are it came from there. Wow. Okay.
I don't think Tredegar
Yeah.
was rolling. What's the source for 500?
The other thing it triggers for me is just it adds another from the operational kind of folks. There's loads right there of rails that could be transported. I mean, it just goes on and on. It's too much fun.
Yeah,
That was
my
good.
question is, what's the source for the rail being found in a warehouse?
I have it here. Hang on. Where was it? Where was it?
I
Where
want
was
to,
it?
yeah, because that's interesting because that would have been should have been reallocated.
It
I,
was.
I'm a retired Defense Department strategist, so I'm sorry. I
Um,
will short.
it was in. I think it was in this one. It was by Edward H. Smith, Back in the Valley. It's in the Images of War, 1861 to 1865, Volume 5, The South Besieged.
Yeah.
Pages 303 to 345.
Okay, so it's secondary source. Okay, I'm looking for the
And he
primary.
describes what again?
Uh, he describes the exact cost of the burning from both the animals, the mills, the foodstuffs, and basically everything that is destroyed in the burning.
Got it.
You said Images of
Crazy.
War, volume what?
Volume 5.
Right.
And which pages?
303 to 345.
Thank you. But yeah,
You,
Joel's right. That rail would have been allocated by the U.S. military for other purposes, such as other USMR branches, such as City Point and on the Orange and Alexandria. There was rail left over for this is a personal thing, for a road in Arkansas that they had ordered pre the war, but was stockpiled at Memphis across the river. And as soon as Sherman took Memphis, that rail was allocated for points east. And unfortunately, the road was never compensated until well after the war for the rail that they bought.
fascinating. Yeah.
And there's a whole thing about where's the gap in the east-west gap, either in Alabama or Mississippi, that was vital. And if you had rail iron sitting in the Shenandoah Valley, I mean that may be one of those states' rights things that was constantly a hamstring. But my understanding was there just wasn't enough rail to complete that gap. You know the one I'm talking about. That
Yeah.
would have been like a more southern equivalent of the Memphis and Charleston would have provided an east-west link in through Atlanta that they were never able to complete.
There was the Alabama and Tennessee rivers, which was moving from Atlanta to I think not Mobile, but it was going. But the gap was in Alabama, right around Talladega. But I don't know if that's the
Yeah,
one you're talking about.
Yeah, because that's all. I was just I'd like to find a primary source for that.
Good.
I'll look for you, Joel. Another thing you
No, I'll put that down on my.
Is Joel trying to talk to us?
yes.
I'll put that down on my
Oh,
next
he's on mute, I
visit
think.
to the archives
Oh, I can
to
hear
see if I
him.
can find
I don't
source.
know about your audio.
I don't hear him. Does anybody hear Joel?
Yeah, I hear him.
I hear him.
Really?
Tom? Yeah, I got it.
User volume.
Yeah,
Huh.
I'm gonna check
Oh, wait
that
a
in the
minute.
archives to see, because that would have been acquired back into the US military rail stock, so
Yeah.
I should find indication on that.
As far as I know, with Sheridan's orders of just total destruction, destroy everything, because it's only from October. Again, the date October 13th always comes up. From October 13th through to I think the 16th. No, it's October 9th to the 16th of
It-
October.
it-
He's just
the-
destroying everything.
He
Yeah,
is,
but
this is Grant's strategy was denial.
Mhm.
And as long as the breadbasket wasn't burned, it was supplying the South.
Right. Yep.
And so that was because they Sheridan's orders were to destroy everything. That I think the conversation was more because he was going to destroy Union sympathizer stuff as well as Confederate sympathizers. It was famine in the valley, and that was the intent of that was the intent. That is the total war intent, and that's how I've always studied it, as a total war intent. It's a terrible thing.
I think there was a book that was written specifically about Sheridan and the destruction that they did. I remember reading, it was a detailed account around the different farms that they went to and the barns that they burned, and lots of stories about the destruction that was laid out in the Shenandoah Valley. And it was reading about it, it kind of puts you right there. So you really have a feel for the amount of destruction that occurred, because I thought it was written in a fairly decent researched capacity.
It was a strategic destruction. It was not callous. It was strategic.
Absolutely. Yep. I think
And
was it down the valley? I don't know.
yeah, you covered it rather nicely. And at the end of it, the army of the Shenandoah was just a shadow
Yep.
when it
Yeah.
got back when it rejoined the trenches at Petersburg. It's all part of that contracting the lines. The South was not going to quit until it was defeated, so that was part of the contraction. It was
Right.
horrible, horrible. Very good. Yeah, you said it much nicer than it probably felt.
That was great, Roy. Thank you so much, man. That was good.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
I know one of our guys, Roger Rossi, wanted to hear what you had to say about the Manassas Gap, because he's building a model railroader with that.
Oh,
A model railroad. And Mike Willigo, oh no, he does City Point. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much,
Cool.
Roy. Your expertise and your passion on this subject really shone
Yeah.
through on this presentation, and we're glad to have you in the group and participating, because we'd love to have your mind.
Yeah.
Where do you live?
Excellent.
You say you're in Virginia?
Yeah, I live literally in Winchester. I'm literally
Oh,
2 minutes,
Winchester, right.
literally in that direction as I point. I'm 2 minutes
Okay.
from Fort Collier, and like I had said before the meeting, the train was going by.
Yeah.
So the Winchester and Potomac Railroad has now been restored, and has been an active railroad for forever after the war.
You got a basement?
Maybe.
Question.
I have minis on my table, so.
So okay, so I will do the pitch to. We do not have a single model from the Shenandoah in our traveling layout.
Oh, in the N scale T-track?
Right, we do not have anything from the Shenandoah.
Question. So the railway is taken over by the USMR. Did they have to bring in their own locomotives due to the original locomotives being long gone, or did they just take over the locomotives already there?
Okay. So for more specifically, you're talking about the Winchester and Potomac Railroad. In the photo that I had shared, I'll go back to it on the slides. Those are they're bigger and stronger B&O railroad locomotives. So not only did the U.S. Military railroads, not only did they come through with the material that they had needed, but with the locomotives and the rolling stock. It was in once Lee had vacated Winchester and that the Union Army had moved through and followed him. Lee put to the torch the railroad shops that were in Winchester, but the Union Army managed to save two locomotives, the Ancient and the President, of which I don't have in my slideshow. But there's the very famous image of them at what was that railway station that we had been talking about?
City Point.
And
The president
City
is
Point.
pictured at City Point several times.
Yeah, and so the United States Military Railroad took those locomotives and put them into service for their own uses. And so at City Point, in those very famous photos, when you outright just look up U.S. Civil War railroads and railroad trains, the president pops up smack dab center in the City Point photos.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank
Have
you.
you ever thought about modeling that scene?
I've actually thought about modeling the Third Battle of Winchester. I actually have with me a bunch of 28 millimeter soldiers, so it's like O scale railroading.
I will be glad to provide you with 10 millimeters,
Okay.
which just happened to go on.
Unpainted minis continues. Oh God!
You see how I slip in, and that'll
And it's
give you
just
an
a little,
opportunity to have your modeling seen all over the country.
it's just a 2 by 2 foot section, piece of cake.
Right.
Okay.
What? Yes, 1 foot by 2 foot, no problem. Double
Yeah.
track, pick your buildings.
All right. Okay.
Wow.
Joel's on the recruiting rampage.
Oh
Hey,
God!
hey. Is there anything wrong with us representing? I would think everybody should have a module in the
Yes.
layout.
And I definitely
I
been
agree,
wanting to get
Joel.
mine done.
I
Okay.
agree.
We've it's going to be interesting this time. Let's see, two are coming in from California as we speak. I'm getting
Bernie's
Kettle Run back in. Bernie's got another 4 feet coming in. Roger is building 4 more feet upstairs in my layout room right now.
What are those going to be?
Those are of another section of the Orange and Alexandria.
Wow, that's great.
Fantastic.
Cool.
So he's got 4 feet of that coming in. But
You're going to need a new
we
trailer.
have no modules because we're getting we're moving out to Mississippi with Bernie's new one, but we don't have anything out of the valley. Everything kind of goes down the Orange or Alexandria or Appomattox. We have the Appomattox Station.
Right.
And we
Cool.
have Charleston and Savannah. And then we have a down by Resaca. So I have a little bit of Georgia, but I have nothing from the valley. And if we have a member who's in the valley, I should always at least invite him into to participate.
Well said.
So,
And if he needs tens, I have about 5,000 10 millimeters.
Joel, would it be, what do you think about, why don't you bring a unbuilt section, and then maybe we could have that as like just a project that's there for the week with the goal to finish one.
Yes, I have a section. Right now I just finished a section, a bridge section, where you have a gap to put a bridge in, and then we've got so we've got 4, 8. So there is no problem if everybody has a module. When we have a convention, we can operate on our layout.
Yeah. 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 Bring a spare one. Let's see if we can add some component of the valley. And maybe
Right.
Roy, you could give us a suggestion as to what the section could be that is like a cool scene.
Okay, I got you.
Good.
I can do
Or
some more.
or just join us at the convention in Chattanooga in July.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to an NMRA conventions? Can be pricey. I understand that. But if you've never been, coming for a couple of days could be a lot of fun.
All right, I'll have to think about it. I'll have to check the schedule.
Cool. Charlie, did you say something?
No.
Oh, got it. Cool. Anything else, gentlemen? All right, then. So I want to thank Roy again for the time and the effervescence with which you presented this topic. It was great, very engaging. And Austin, thanks for hooking us up and doing the recording. And gentlemen, all the best to you guys. We'll see you in June when we will have Will Shirey talking about how he paints O-scale figures for the M&C Railroad. And of course, July will be in Chattanooga. August, we have Dr. Joe Bailey. And then in September, we have Mike Willigall going to talk about the changes that he's been making to his City Point HO scale. Nice lineup.